Good morning, Dawg Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We are happy to have you with us. Busy weekend for Georgia on the recruiting front. We're going to talk a lot about that. That will be fun. We will briefly mention the stuff involving Sacovie White just because we sort of feel like we have to. I promise we won't spend very much time on it just because I don't think it warrants it necessarily, but at least needs to come up. So we'll do that here in a little bit. Jon Stinchcomb stops by there as well, so that'll be a fun discussion. Also, ESPN, in a roundabout way, has shown a little love towards Georgia. We'll talk about why that is here coming up in just a little bit. Also, good weekend for the softball team. They advance. Tough weekend for the Georgia baseball team. We'll cover some of that ground there as well. So as you can tell, it's one of those days where there's a lot of little things going on, and we're going to try to grab as much of it as we can here. So let's get ready to do that here today. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, many of you are aware there was the situation involving Sacovie White over the weekend. In a few minutes, we'll spend a couple of minutes on that. You got to mention it. We'll talk about that. Not a huge deal, I don't think, so therefore not the kind of thing we need to make the whole show about today or anything like that. But we will do that here coming up in just a little bit. Prior to that, though, can we do something a lot more fun here just for a moment? Because it was a tremendously active weekend for Georgia recruiting. A lot of this centering around the event known as the Scavenger Hunt. And I like the Scavenger Hunt in particular for one reason, which we'll kind of get to here coming up in a little bit. But I also want to say this, that beyond just the Scavenger Hunt, there were a couple of things that were not Scavenger Hunt related here this weekend that I do think are pretty compelling in their own right there as well. So this is going to be kind of one of those shows where there's a lot of different things going on. We're kind of grabbing a little bit of this and grabbing a little bit of that. And so we're going to try to keep it moving and make it all make sense. But I do think I think weekends like this are kind of fun to follow from afar. And, you know, the way in which the media operates now and social media operates gives us a chance to feel like we're a little bit more of a fly on the wall for some of this kind of stuff than perhaps years ago we would have been able to. In fact, our Jeff Santel, speaking of the media, was very quick to get some insight into how things went down with the Scavenger Hunt. Zaire Addison, one of the guys who was there, four-star offensive lineman out of the state of Florida. And there are a couple of different quotes over the course of the next few minutes I want to kind of highlight from Addison, both about his own experience, but also broadly speaking, the experience of what it's like to be here for an event like this. And look, you know, we kind of live in an age now where it seems like recruiting in some respects is sort of all about NIL, and clearly that is probably maybe the most important factor. Certainly it is a huge factor in almost every single recruitment that goes down. We understand that. In previous years, you know, the replacement for NIL would have been, oh, come here and see how nice our cafeteria is, or how big our weight room is, or look at in some respects, the waterfall we have in our football building, or the lazy river we have going around our facility. You know, there was all that kind of stuff going on. In other words, there have always been bells and whistles and trappings involved in recruitment, you know, kind of, you know, shiny, exciting things that perhaps sometimes get extra attention from the media and at times more attention than they deserve. But the main, spine of recruiting, the main foundation of recruiting, the main building block of recruiting has always, I think, been something different than that. And Zaire Addison, who was in Athens here this weekend, he had a quote to Jeff Santel at DawgNation.com that I think demonstrates just how true this is. I want to read this to you here, and I just think this is incredibly insightful into what recruiting is really like here. So what Addison says is, I just wanted to build a closer relationship with all of these coaches. He means Kirby Smart, Stacey Searles, by the way, a happy recent birthday to Coach Searles. He says, I didn't really care about all the facilities and stuff. I just wanted to know what the game plan was coming in with me, what the game plan was with the coaches for Zaire Addison. So a little bit of a third-person reference for Addison. We don't mind that necessarily, but there you go. He says, listen, I'm not worried about, you know, facilities or anything like that. I want relationships with these coaches, and I want an insight into how they plan on using me. And you better believe, whether it was old school day when media people were kind of fixating on facilities, or maybe new school day when it sort of seems like people are sort of fixating on NIL, The relationships, we believe, are the name of the game when it comes to recruiting. And one of the biggest reasons that Georgia's able to have the recruiting success it's been able to enjoy is because of how authentically and consistently it forms these relationships. By the way, even in a time in which NIL matters so much, there is still the need for trust. And, use this in your own life. Sometimes I'll mention this. Go look at like the spam folder of your email. Look at all the offers you have. Companies that want to save you money. In some cases, Nigerian princes that want to give you money or whatever crazy emails you get, right? You get all these crazy emails and they all promise you some sort of financial reward. But you don't trust any of those messages because you don't have a relationship with the sender. And I do believe that NIL, for the most part, works the same way. That, hey, money matters and, a lot of these programs want to lead with NIL. But if you don't have a relationship with that program, with the coach who's, perhaps, starting the NIL conversation with you, then do you really trust the promise of the money? And this is why, once again, for a guy like Addison saying, hey, I want to build those relationships. I want to make sure I have that strong bond, make sure I understand how they're going to use me. I think the unspoken subtext of that is that way when the NIL conversation starts to take place, well, I have some certainty that what I'm hearing is the truth because of how well I feel like I know these coaches here right now. And by the way, this goes beyond just a guy like Zaire Addison. This is also true for the other prospects who are on campus there as well. In fact, I want to show you this picture of Zayden Walker. Walker is one of these guys who obviously we've gotten used to, and you see Glenn Schumann, if you're watching on video right there in the center of your screen, we've gotten used to Walker winning, I should say Georgia winning, and Schumann in particular winning with the very best linebackers in the country year after year after year. But in the case of Walker, who's that version of that guy here this year, this is a pretty contested recruitment. This is a situation where South Carolina's making its big push. And sometimes we see Georgia in these battles where, the one school who doesn't get a ton of 5 stars, has its chance to maybe put all of its eggs in that basket of going for a big name like that, and yet Georgia's going to try to be as competitive as it can and win these type of battles. And how Georgia ultimately wins with a guy like Walker is a little bit like, I believe, what Addison was saying there a moment ago. Show me how you're going to use me. Form that bond, that relationship with me. And if I trust you, then maybe I'll choose you over the other schools who perhaps, need me more and are showing me they want me, in a more intense way. But the level of trust between that player and Georgia is just so strong, it becomes a bond that's hard to beat. It seems like that Georgia made some of those same type of strides with a guy like Walker here this weekend. We'll certainly look forward to reading more about that at DawgNation.com. Also, when you think about, Addison describing the bond that can be formed on a weekend like this, it's not just player with program or player with coach. Sometimes it's the players that gather around the program with these coaches, the bonds they form with each other. That can also be really strong there as well. In fact, I'll show you this. I love some of the stuff we got from the Georgia commit, Mason Short, here this weekend, talking about David Sanders Jr. being at home. And if you're watching a video, you see a tiny glimpse there of Sanders' face. They were at the baseball game together there on Saturday. Short, one of the many examples of the thing that he's doing to try to win with a guy like Sanders and perhaps Addison there too, of course. But nonetheless, these guys forming a bond with each other. And other photos you saw of the weekend, many times when you saw Sanders, you saw Short right beside him. Those photos are being taken. So weekends like this end up being very much about the relationships. The relationship the player has with the coach, the relationship the player has with the program, and the potential relationship that these players could have with each other there as well. That's what a lot of this ends up being. And, of course, all of this around the notion of what Georgia calls a scavenger hunt. And I don't know. There's a part of me, and admittedly I'm sort of corny, I guess, but there's a part of me that still really much enjoys the fact that these players who are very cool, they have awesome opportunities available to them. They drive fancy cars. They have a lot of NIL. They'll one day be, household names, many of them in the NFL. But there's still the sort of like wholesome, sort of almost like homespun style fun that they can have in a weekend like this that seems pretty low tech and seems kind of old school in some respects. I just really like the idea of this. And in fact, to go back to Zaire Addison for a moment, with the story with Jeff Santel at DawgNation.com, he described a little bit more about what the scavenger hunt's actually like and how much the players sort of get into the competition of all of this. Let me read a little bit to you here from DawgNation.com. This is Addison saying, about his team and the Scavenger Hunt, the fellow offensive lineman. It started off bad with one of the assistant offensive line coaches. His tire went flat on the golf cart. You can imagine those big guys in the golf cart, probably not exactly easy on those tires, maybe. But anyway, Addison goes on to say that kind of stalled our time. But after that, it was still fun. You know, this line group has the fastest time for the offensive lineman in Scavenger Hunt history. Don't you love the fact that Addison knows that? He's like, hey, listen, we're chasing history here there as well. Offensive linemen have never done as well as we have. He went on to say, I just want you to put that out there. We did our thing. It was fun. We had to find a whole bunch of puzzles and connect them all together. We had a great time. It was real fun. He goes on to say, we had to take pictures of certain parts of Georgia's football history. You've really got to show how competitive you are, not just for football, but your competitive nature in general. I feel like that was really the key thing I was looking for. I know the whole purpose was just having fun, but the coaches really wanted to see how competitive that you are. And I like that, right? It's kind of low tech. It's sort of, old school, driving around, trying to find things on campus and take pictures. You can't necessarily solve that problem with the internet. You've got to kind of do that, I guess, on your own. And he sort of gets into it. There's sort of a wholesome nature of the fun on all of that I really enjoy. If you're curious here, the actual winner of the Scavenger Hunt, by the way, was not the offensive lineman, even though Addison says they had the best time for any group of offensive linemen who've ever gone through the Scavenger Hunt. I guess the ultimate credit here goes to the quarterbacks being led by Jared Curtis, who's the number one prospect in the class of 2026. He and his family were on hand with this, teamed up there with Mike Bobo. I think we have this photo we can show you. That Curtis and the quarterback team here, Bobo and Curtis together, were the overall winners there for the Scavenger Hunt. And I think this is kind of nice. Obviously, you want your quarterback to be successful in situations like this, I reckon. But also for the fact that, when Curtis first committed to Georgia, going back, a couple of months ago, it seemed like it was a little bit quick, it kind of out of nowhere a little bit. I don't know that many of us were expecting that to happen in the week when it occurred. But yet here these weeks later, you see Curtis and his family there. They're all decked out in Georgia gear. They're all smiling with Coach Bobo right there. Curtis starts to feel a little bit more like a firmly entrenched member of the future of the Georgia kind of football community here with that 2026 commitment. And I guess at this point in time, I kind of want to pull back beyond just the Scavenger Hunt for a moment, because honestly, there's so much more from the Scavenger Hunt than we can possibly sort of address during this particular time of the show. Jeff Santel will have a lot for you there at DawgNation.com. But I want to use the Curtis mention as a jumping off point to say that it wasn't just Scavenger Hunt news for Georgia football in the recruiting realm over the course of this weekend. Another Georgia quarterback commit got himself some very good news. Did you see that Ryan Montgomery, after a pretty impressive performance in one of the qualifying events, is now on his way to the Elite 11 finals in California later on this summer? His quarterback coach, Brad Mandler, putting that out there, that Ryan Montgomery has earned a finals invite. Montgomery was probably a little bit less heralded, certainly than other quarterbacks we've talked about around Georgia recruiting over the course of the last couple of years. But on the basis of this invite, would seem to be coming into his own at exactly the right time. And when you think about, there's been some video out there the last few days of Ryan Puglisi, who's kind of coming off a little bit of an injury. He's been doing some off-season throwing, and he really looks good. Man, strong arm for Puglisi. And obviously working to get that athleticism back after dealing with a little bit of an off-season injury. So you got him waiting in the wings. You've got Montgomery now on his way to the Elite 11 finals. That's exciting. And Jared Curtis, who is the top prospect of anybody in the class of 2026, seemingly having a really good time at the Scavenger Hunt over the course of the weekend. All of a sudden, the future of the Georgia quarterback position seems really interesting, and that's before you even get to guys like Gunnar Stockton and Jaden Rashada. There's a lot happening for Georgia right now, both current roster and future dogs at the quarterback position, and at some point in time, sifting through that some more is going to be a pretty interesting thing. And then one more thing to give you here before we wrap up this portion of the show here today. Obviously, there was also another interesting note involving potentially a Georgia football commit here over the weekend. That is pretty fun to kind of pay attention to there as well. Did you see C.J. Wiley's performance in Milton's spring game? Now, in high school football, oftentimes teams will play other teams for their spring games. Milton got a chance to play Peachtree Ridge, and what a performance it was for C.J. Wiley. Jeff Santel was on hand. Wiley had 2 touchdowns in the game there on Friday against what was last year a pretty good Peachtree Ridge program, and I'm assuming a pretty good team for this upcoming season there as well. So Wiley right now, and you can see what's being said about this, is moving up these recruiting ranking boards at a rapid pace to the point where he may be viewed as one of the absolute best wide receivers in America before this 2025 cycle is all said and done. And obviously, we're led to believe that Georgia's in a pretty good spot for Wiley, obviously, in what's turning out to be a really competitive recruitment. So there is a lot out there when it comes to Georgia recruiting here right now. Georgia hosted Scavenger Hunt, deepens its relationship with some big-time prospects, in many cases ahead of what will be official visits here coming up over the course of the next couple of weeks. It also hosted, I believe, 4 official visitors this past weekend there as well. Ryan Montgomery, the quarterback commit, he's kind of earning some extra accolades here ahead of his senior season. And Georgia may be in pursuit of a receiver who may end up being as big a name to know at that position as the 2025 class has to offer. We've been telling you for a while there was going to be a really fun recruiting summer with news flying fast and furious. And this weekend was a little bit of a foreshadowing of just how true that is eventually going to be. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We're happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today. That's true across all video platforms at 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcasts, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. And one of the things I've been doing the last few days is kind of picking out a specific group in our audience and asking a little bit of a favor from you. I want to do that today for the folks. If you listen on the Apple Podcast Player. Now, here's the thing. This is the platform that sort of started it all. We, believe it or not, are now considered a kind of an old podcast because we've been on that platform since, August of 2015. Many of you have been with us since the beginning. And if you do listen to the Apple Podcast platform, especially if you like the show, would you mind leaving us an Apple review there? We obviously, of course, of years gathered hundreds of reviews. A lot of our reviews are actually now pretty old because we as a show are pretty old. So if you've never given us a review on Apple and if you like the show, we would obviously love to hear that, especially if you have, to be self-serving here for a moment, if you've got kind things to say, that'd be great. If not so kind, then maybe send me an email. But if you got kind things to say, go ahead and drop that as a review for us in the Apple Podcast platform. I'm told that helps with certain things like growing the show, which is obviously important because this is how we're feeding family. So if you do that, that'd be great. We certainly appreciate that. By the way, big thanks to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Make the show possible for you here today. We're always excited about all of that. And you can be excited about that there as well. This time of year, the spring time of year, it's when you kind of think of spring cleaning or getting that house in sort of tip-top shape. Well, if you want to take the best care of your home that you possibly can, upgrading to the Pella windows and doors, we think is the best way to do that. Now, you can hear me talk about this, and I guess I know a thing or two. But if you have a conversation with one of those Pella experts, you'll get even more information about all of this. Why don't you give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. You can also email them, pellaofga.com/DawgNation. That's pellaofga.com/DawgNation. It is a no-pressure discussion. You can go visit them, Experience Center in Duluth. They'll come out and visit you in your home. You can do a virtual conversation. You'd rather do that. But it's just a way to educate you about why, whether it becomes curb appeal on the outside of your house, the energy savings potential on the inside of your home, why the Pella product is the right thing for you here right now. Plus great savings. You can hear about this between now and May 31st. How about 10% off a Pella project, plus no payments, no interest until 2025. That is what it's all about. So make sure you find them, and make sure you tell them that BA from DawgNation Daily said they would take good care of you, because I know they will. Give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. PellaofGA.com/DawgNation is the email address, is the web address, I should say. PellaofGA.com/DawgNation. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. We've got Jon Stinchcomb here coming up in just a moment. Good stuff to get into with Jon. Prior to that, let's go around the doghouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And, here's one of those moments where, at least for a second, we got to talk about something that seems pretty irritating. If I got caught up in all of this on Saturday night, early Sunday morning, I guess I'd be pretty irritated too. I think that Sacovie White's well within his rights to sort of feel, kind of aggravated by all of this. I'll show you as it was reported at DawgNation.com. So freshman receiver Sacovie White was arrested on Saturday morning on 2 misdemeanor charges of reckless driving and driving down a one-way road per the Athens-Clarke County jail log. So what happens is he's driving the wrong way. Now, not speeding, not drinking, nothing like that, just driving the wrong way, something that I have done many, many times, not just in Athens, but around a lot of these old school, kind of small downtowns in Georgia, they all have very complicated traffic patterns, and I've messed them up a million times. Obviously, a little bit different if you do that in the afternoon compared to very late at night, I guess. But once again, Sacovie wasn't doing anything, all that salacious or bad or anything like that. He just made an error, something that we're all sort of prone to do. And what's gotten a lot of attention is that he was booked, he was taken downtown, he wasn't there very long, and he was released on just $26 bond, which sounds like something you'd hear in Monopoly, the board game, more so than real life. So all of this seems really weird. What a lot of the people online are telling you is that something like this may be related to his age and a curfew-type violation based on all kinds of sort of weird minutia of the law that I perhaps don't know all that much about. So it's one of those things I don't even really feel like talking about all that much, but it happened, and it got a big reaction on Sunday when people found out about it. So on a show like this, we probably got to say a little something about it. We can bring that screen down if you want to now. So I think on the one hand, my response to this involving Sacovie White is probably not all that surprising to you. I'm not bothered by this at all. I'm not scandalized by this at all. I know a lot of people who know Sacovie really well. They're going to tell you that this is going to end up being one of the best dudes that's been around Georgia football, in the smart era, perhaps when all said and done. This was a big-time leader for his high school team. This is a guy that is likely to be, how it seems like a lot of the same guys end up being on these committees, these SEC committees and things like that, Kearis Jackson would be an example of this, was always sort of, when you had to trust one football player to represent you on some SEC-wide committee, oftentimes Kearis Jackson sort of ended up being that guy. I believe that Sacovie White is that guy, maybe of this future era of Georgia football too. This is going to be one of the most important leaders in this organization, and driving the wrong way late at night in downtown Athens, I can promise you, doesn't change my opinion on that at all. And I'm guessing that for the most part, we are fairly, consistent maybe in our agreement about that. Now, I am also going to say something that many of you are not going to agree with, but I guess honesty compels me to admit this. And by the way, one of the things that we really try to do is we try to stay in our lane. We do not venture outside the boundaries that we typically talk about, because when it comes to sort of real world things, I think that people have a right to disagree. I think it's okay to have differing points of view. And since we're on the subject of this, I sort of feel like it's probably appropriate for me to sort of share my sort of wide-ranging point of view on this there as well. As I just told you a moment ago, I'm not mad at Sacovie for driving the wrong way. He wasn't speeding, wasn't drinking, wasn't doing anything like that. He just made a wrong turn downtown Atlanta very late on a Saturday. I have to say, and this is where some of you are going to, I'm going to lose some of you, but I'm also not mad at the police either. I don't think being a police officer downtown Athens very late on a Saturday night is a very easy job. I just don't. I said some of the same stuff to our video audience the other day. I think it was our 1st and 15 as it relates to the Scotty Scheffler thing. Like the Scheffler thing, and everybody in the world has talked about that now, sort of feels like one of the great mistakes of all time by the Louisville Police Department. But honestly, directing traffic after a fatality in a situation where security is incredibly heightened right now, that seems like a pretty hard job too. And doing the job aggressively is probably easier than doing the job passively. And that's what this police officer seems to do. And I know everybody's kind of making fun of him because of what he said about his pants being ripped and things like that. I don't want the guy to get fired. I don't want the guy to get doxxed. I don't want the guy to become, the laughing stock that his behavior perhaps suggests that he should be, because I don't think that's an easy job. And when it comes to this sort of police situation there too, this seems like sort of ticky-tack and excessive. But I'm sure there are plenty of law enforcement experts that'll tell you that being ticky-tack and excessive in terms of how you police downtown, kind of an entertainment district, a bar district, perhaps is the best way to keep everybody the safest the most consistently, which sort of feels irritating to you if you're the one that's caught up into it. And my guess is that Sacovie probably feels pretty irritated about getting caught up in what was kind of a ticky-tack sort of nonsense type situation. But I would just believe a couple of things. A, not every story has to have a villain. Sacovie White didn't really do anything wrong. I don't think the police necessarily did anything wrong either, at least assuming they followed the law, which I'm guessing that they probably did. I know a lot of, either media types or opposing fans are going to want to try to fan the flames of stuff like this. But as a Georgia fan, we don't have to swing at every pitch. We just don't. Some things are worth our attention and our anger, and some things are not. This, to me, is not a scandal. This is just a thing that happened, and I don't know that there's anything much more that needs to be said about it other than that. And that is Around the Doghouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. Now, I may not love talking about subjects like that, but I do love talking about Dr. Pepper. And one of the things I have loved from some of you as of late is the excitement you have about the brand new flavor of Dr. Pepper, the Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut and the Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut Zero Sugar. What a great new entry into the sort of the summer vibe here around here right now. Coconut just sort of feels very summery. It feels very tropical. So as you got some vacation stuff coming up, or you're just at the lake or the pool, boy, it seems like a little Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut or Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut Zero Sugar is a great way to enjoy all of that. So as you're shopping at your local Kroger or wherever else you're picking up your groceries here right now, give the Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut and the Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut Zero Sugar a try. It sounds like a lot of folks are really, really loving that here right now. And that is Around the Doghouse, poured by Dr. Pepper here today. All right, so we got a lot to do. A little bit of love from ESPN for Georgia. We'll get to that here in just a moment. Also, a little bit of a reaction to kind of a mixed bag for spring sports for Georgia here this weekend, too. So let's cover all of that ground and more as we get ready to welcome in the former Georgia All-American, Jon Stinchcomb, here today. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insight.
And we'll say hello to Jon Stinchcomb here, the former Georgia All-American. Jon, always a great guy to have as a part of the conversation. Some fun stuff to talk to Jon about. Look at Jon, he's all businesslike. Normally, Jon's kind of joining us from his home office. Today, he's joining us from a slightly different. You know, you are a man of business when you have like multiple offices, and Jon is now joining us here from a second office here today. For those of you watching on video, Jon, it's not a fun topic, but I do want to get your point of view on this. I said a moment ago, I am not scandalized by Sacovie White like driving down the wrong road. I think I've done that a million times. You need to be careful while you're driving, but I've made errors when I'm driving because I'm prone to error in a lot of ways in life. I also kind of don't want to turn the police into a villain about this either, because guess what? I don't want to be policing downtown Athens at 3 o'clock on a Saturday morning. That seems like a really hard job to do. And, you know, sort of broken window style policing probably seems like, you know, a better strategy than, you know, y'all just be careful out there, you know, type mindset. I don't think every story has to have a villain. This is a thing that happened. It, of course, brings up a strong reaction from fans because I think they're on guard about how they think the media or other fans may try to, like, make this into a thing. But we don't have to swing at every pitch. And some things are just, you know, not much more than, okay, this occurred, now let's just move on. Is there something about this that you think I'm getting wrong?
Well, first, you give me too much credit for having two offices. I'm actually live from Athens, so I'm in the athletic training room at the Buttsmere, and they're allowing me to use some space. I'm here for the Athletic Medical Review Board meeting. DawgNation, you should feel honored and valued, because I walked out. It was Coach Smart and Coach Schumann were talking to our group. So prioritizing y'all over listening to what they had to say, which was really good stuff.
I hate to pull you out of that. I'd rather have you in there and bringing back some secret information of what they shared, perhaps.
Too late now, BA. I've already walked out of the meeting.
Well, listen, I will say it is very kind to have you here, because that's obviously an important part of your role there as part of the athletic board, and also just kind of interesting stuff to do, too. So you are very kind that you would spend some time and join us.
No, it's good stuff. But, you know, for the Sacovie White deal, mistake. It's something that pops up. You can talk about it, move on from it. Don't dwell on it. You know, it's not an indictment of his character, nor is it an indictment of the police doing their job. And whether you think it's ticky-tack or not, I don't have to fill those shoes, and I don't have to make those decisions, and I'm grateful for those that do. And if that's the letter of the law and we're following it, then, you know, the response was according to what was availed to that officer. So, you know, to me, not a big deal, not a slight for Sacovie, and I don't think we're going to be talking about this for very much longer.
No, I don't think that's going to be the case either. I think you're right about that. And before I kind of move on to some of those stuff I want to talk to you about, how about a little bit of a preview of how you think these, you know, discussions with the athletic board are going to go here? What is on the docket here for the athletic board? Obviously, this time of year is when stuff like this kind of comes up. You know, what is kind of on the docket for you all here over the course of the next couple of days?
Yeah. So the athletic board meeting is later this week. It's Thursday and Friday of this week. And, we're going to talk about some of the facility upgrades, which continue to happen across campus. Some of the new hires, obviously, with gymnastics and women's golf, and just the trajectory of the athletics overall is positive. But I think what everyone is waiting to hear is the outcome of some of these cases and how it affects numbers and overall scholarships and engagement for players. I think, that's not a Georgia decision. That's an NCAA landscape issue, and how it's going to affect literally everyone and every sport. I foresee a reduction in scholarships and some of those, if you're going to pay players, if you will, in an organized way, I think that affects numbers. And I think it's got to be different. The landscape is different in college than it is in every professional field. So, right now we have teams, the football team's got 130 players. Well, that affects how you practice. Whereas, in the NFL during the season, you have 53 on your roster and, an extra 16 or so in practice squad. Well, that's almost half as many total as what you can in college. And not to mention, you get a couple players hurt and you add players. That's not available to college football teams specifically. So I think there's so much to iron out and so much to work out. But until we find out what the settlements are from some of the cases that are still pending, it's all speculation. And it's scary.
Yeah, it is. And in a place like Georgia, and what John's referencing here, there's, for instance, the House versus NCAA case where it looks like we're heading for a settlement because the NCAA is afraid it'll lose if it doesn't settle. But even the settlement, some of the news reports would have you believe it may be as much as like $2.7 billion, that's with a B, back pay to previous athletes and sort of establishing sort of a revenue sharing model, moving forward, which, if I'm doing the math correctly, could, result in, obviously it's many millions, but in case, like not like a 9-figure type sum or something like that, big time dollars going out here. And without getting too tedious and too in the weeds here, is that the kind of thing that Georgia would have to dip into its reserve funds for? I mean, obviously Georgia throughout its years have been a more solvent athletic department than some of its brethren in the SEC, who at times have been, kind of running at a deficit. Is that the kind of thing that Georgia could use just sort of regular, cash flow revenue to pay for? Or would it maybe have to dip into its reserves in order to sort of satisfy its obligation on what's about to be a gigantic settlement that impacts Georgia and every other major program as well?
I think all those things are TBD. And looming, Georgia is in as good, if not the best situation as any program across the country fiscally. I think you look at what happened during COVID, and you saw some of the cutbacks that occurred in some major universities and furloughs and how it affected employment. And Georgia was better situated than most schools. I think the same will hold true. With that said, you start talking in the B's, and even though it's spread out across multiple teams and there could be some insurance involvement there, there's going to be major implications on that bottom line. And, again, I think you just kind of wait and see how it all plays out and what the obligations are per school. But I think Georgia is better situated than most to face that financial obligation, no matter what it is. But, you start talking $2.7 billion, that's going to be a bite for everyone.
We saw a fun series of photos and kind of a fun conversation before you joined us as it relates to the Georgia recruiting scavenger hunt over the weekend. And some of the stuff I like the most there are guys like Mason Short and David Sanders hanging out with each other, all of the offensive linemen going through the scavenger hunt event together. And, John, my question for you as an offensive lineman, I've always sort of felt like chemistry was more important for offensive linemen than it was for other position groups because, and maybe I'm wrong about this, I've just always assumed that offensive linemen had to play together more so than the other position groups do. Perhaps that's incorrect, but that's my perception anyway. So if that is true, that, hey, the way in which you kind of have on-field chemistry with each other matters, then developing some sort of chemistry before you even get to Georgia is perhaps important for that group too. Like, what is your, I guess, kind of thought on all of that? The fact that you see these offensive lineman recruits hanging out together, and maybe the thought that this particular position, you better see those other offensive linemen as sort of a form of brotherhood if you're going to be able to play together when the moment calls for it.
Oh yeah, chemistry across an offensive line is mandatory to perform at a really high level, and I think it's important for guys to build that rapport. There's a reason why, across the NFL, most Thursday nights there's offensive line groups that are getting together and going to dinner to try to create those bonds. And it exists in other spaces. You hear quarterbacks having good rapport with wide receivers, and secondary players, cornerbacks and safeties being on the same page. Yeah, there are other position groups where it helps to be working well with one another, but I don't think that holds true for any position group more than the offensive line. I think the ability to work with one another and understand and pick up, and whether it's blitz pickup or coordination in the run game, and understanding how somebody likes to enter into blocks and how you will work well alongside of the people that you're playing next to. I think that all matters. And so now this time of year is a great time to build some of that chemistry and that rapport with one another that you can trust and lean on, because when somebody screws up, it's not like, golly, I hate that guy. It's like, man, how can we do that better? How can we as a group function? Because that's what makes this sport so beautiful. It has to be, it can't be done in isolation. It has to be done as a whole. And when you build that rapport with one another and you have that love and trust, then you perform at a much higher level. I think every team sport knows that when you care about the person next to you, most likely your performance is going to improve as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I want to ask you a non-football related question here in a moment to close things out. But prior to that, one of the things we've had some fun with over the course of the last couple weeks, I like this time of year because I like the rankings, I like the list, things like that. We see Kirby Smart coming out as college football's top coach and all the different media polls that are putting that out. Nobody disputes that. But I am curious from you, who do you think the biggest challenger to Kirby Smart moving forward is going to be? Because the prevailing narrative right now is there's no Nick Saban, there's no Jim Harbaugh. The types of guys we see alongside Kirby in polls like this in recent years, they're just not there anymore. And so the space between Kirby and the next best coach in college football seems pretty wide right now. Do you see an either established name that's maybe not getting enough credit or an up-and-coming name that we perhaps might be looking at more in future years?
Well, I look at programs, right? So they're building programs. And for Ohio State, this is a make or break year for that program. Which same could be said specifically for Ryan Day. It's, now there's no excuses. You've put together an all-star roster that should compete with literally anyone on the national scale. So are we having the same conversation next year? It's either there's a new coach that is running Ohio State, or he's in that discussion because they finally lived up to the billing that they seem to receive on an annual basis. I think Sarkisian is another that has now built a program, inherited a really good one, and taken it to that next step. And can they be that next national destination and standard bearer that the rest of the league is shooting for? So, I think those are the closest to. Obviously, anytime you're replacing a coach like Nick Saban, one, that's a challenge, but two, you walk into a situation where the cupboards are not bare. And so there's a high expectation to see what can you do when you do inherit a very talented roster. With all that said, Kirby Smart is the best college football coach and is at the top of the mountain that everyone's shooting to climb. So it's hard earned, and it's something that I don't think he takes lightly. And the compensation is just based on what he provides for this university and the standard that he's raised all of college athletics to.
We will finish with this. I love this time of year because I do enjoy other sports, right? I mean, I'm obviously a huge football fan, and football is the reason that I have a job. But, man, it's fun to watch the reaction that the Georgia softball team is generating right now, and the kind of thrilling, come from behind, win that they had to kind of preserve their regional win and now move on to a super regional where they're going to go out to L.A. and take on UCLA. And not as much fun for the baseball team here this weekend, but overall – that's been a really fun story as they prepare for a postseason coming up, and what's already been, I think, a surprisingly good season, pleasant surprise for them tennis team came with an eyelash, I guess, winning a national championship. I don't follow that sport quite as closely, but it's nice to see them obviously having great success under a first-year coach, I believe. So, just as someone who's on the athletic board and is obviously proud of your alma mater, how much fun are you having right now with some of the stuff that's out there with some of the other Georgia sports as well?
Well, I think like most Georgia fans, we want to see Georgia win everything and every sport. And so for, softball team had to win both games yesterday, and they did, and continue on. It's always a proud moment for us that wear the G when our teams find that success. And tennis ended up losing last night, but it's always great. I think it's great for the university, and I think that's part of the standard that has been set. The expectation is, Josh Brooks, the athletic director, constantly pushes is that we should be competing for championships across all sports and all teams. And I think when that is the expectation from leadership, then it trickles down, top down. And it's great because Georgia should. I don't think there's a reason or an excuse for any of our teams to fall short. But I'll be the first to say, hadn't watched a single pitch from the softball team, but man, I'll be bragging on them because it's part of the Georgia way, and we're proud of the teams that we've fielded and continue to represent the university.
Well, Jon, I certainly appreciate you making time for us today, as you said, in the midst of what's kind of an interesting thing for you to be a part of there. Busy week here for the UGA Athletic Board, so we'll let you get back in there and enjoy that. Sure enough, thanks so much for stopping by and choosing to be with us here today. Really appreciate that. And we will look forward to talking to you very soon here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia as well.
Appreciate it, BA. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, when it comes to the other spring sports, admittedly, I know more about the baseball team than I do the other sports. That's just what it is. And obviously it was not, not a great week. It really kind of, a lot of this sort of centers around, the fourth inning on Saturday where Georgia ended up giving up, 12 runs, something like that. I mean, I think what a lot of people are going to say is that when Georgia had those back-to-back sweeps against ranked teams, South Carolina and Vanderbilt, perhaps over the course of that, 6-game span, Georgia was probably pitching a little bit over its head in terms of what its season-long performance had been. That was probably about 125% of what Georgia had been from a pitching standpoint for much of the year. This was a little bit, perhaps, a market correction this weekend against a Florida team that was absolutely desperate. Florida had to have the series to perhaps even advance into the NCAA regional. And so they had a little bit of a different level of motivation than Georgia did. Georgia did get Caglione knocked out of the game, fairly early on Saturday, but could not take advantage of all of that. I'm not going to pretend to be like Kendall Rogers or one of these guys that's sort of covering college baseball for a living. But if I had to guess, the SEC tournament upcoming this week is going to probably be fairly inconsequential, I think, to Georgia's overall seeding, and that Georgia probably, by virtue of not winning against Florida this weekend, has probably cost itself a chance to host Super Regional, but almost certainly will still host an NCAA Regional. If I had to guess, that's probably what the situation is going to be, but take all of that, I think, with a grain of salt. All right, with that said, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. A lot of you know we've been talking a lot about Utopia of the Seas and the debut of that ship here in July. Well, guess what? It's really ready to go. Even so much so, some of you even know this because you were scheduled to be on one of these early cruises. You almost never see this happen, but they actually moved up the very first sailing of Utopia of the Seas. They did this a month or so ago because the ship was just ready, and it's been, sailing around, and just did a little bit of a short stint over in France, kind of testing, making sure everything's sort of ready to go. One of those sort of important construction milestones, kind of making sure that the ship can kind of handle everything that's needed to do. All the stuff you'll be happy to know sort of working out well right now, and including not just the regular navigation stuff you kind of see down there in the boiler room and stuff like that. I'm kind of fascinated by all of this because when it's all said and done, this is still a real ship and it's got a real working crew. I mean, it's it sort of feels like you're in a kind of a floating city, but the truth is it still functions very much like a city. But also the Aqua Theater here, and one of the things that I just think is amazing is that high diving show on the back of the ship where, you see divers jumping, I think it's 30 feet in the air, something crazy like that. And it's one of the things that sort of sets the kind of the Oasis class of ships apart from everything else, because you do see that Aqua Theater there on the back of the ship, and obviously going to test to make sure that's all working well. The resort pool, they're all working the way they're supposed to. And so good news here. It certainly seems like Utopia of the Seas is ready to start greeting passengers here coming up in just a few weeks. So that's going to be a lot of fun. If you want your own time to be on Utopia of the Seas, much like I'm going to get in July, our friend Jessica Slater, great travel agent, can help you out with that. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. So let's talk here, cruise around the SEC here for a moment. ESPN has updated its, at this point in time, it's not a way too early top 25 anymore. At this point in time, it's essentially just a preseason top 25. And what I thought was kind of interesting in light of what we've been seeing a lot of lately, where when top 25s have been updated or new hot takes are coming out, we're seeing Ohio State get love in place of Georgia. But in this particular case, according to ESPN, it's actually Georgia who stays ranked number one here. Ohio State not getting that nod there. So Georgia stays ahead of Ohio State in the post-spring version of ESPN's preseason top 25. But how about the other SEC teams who are here for a moment? Texas coming in at number 3. And I do think, and we've said so much lately about all the things that are going to make this season so different for Georgia fans. This is one of the big ones, is that Texas, for the most part, other than, I guess, the 2018 Sugar Bowl, has seemed to exist in a completely different orbit for Georgia for most of our lifetime. But this year, that's just not going to be true. I mean, it is entirely possible that Georgia and Texas play 3 times. And obviously, there's a chance it doesn't occur that way. But we know they're playing in October. DawgNation Invasion, obviously, to Austin is coming up. They will be the 2 teams most likely to play in the SEC championship, although figuring out how you kind of get there with all the, sort of craziness of the new format for the SEC championship quite different. And if those 2 teams are playing in the SEC championship, they'll also probably both be playoff teams there as well. So one of the things that we're going to see in this sort of new era are new rivalries forming pretty quick. If it ends up being true that Georgia and Texas play 3 times, Georgia and Texas with, 2 coaches, Steve Sarkisian, who's kind of vying to be, what we just said a moment ago, one of the chief contenders for Kirby Smart, and Smart, who's trying to hold on to his throne here right now. I mean, this could get real interesting real fast. And with Texas predicted to be number 3, just a couple of spots behind Georgia, a lot of folks think that it will be. Then you've got an entire glut of SEC teams near the end of the top 10 of the ESPN updated top 25. Ole Miss is at 6, Bama's at 7, Missouri's at 8. You've got LSU coming in at 14 and Tennessee coming in at 15. So what you're talking about here is, and then Oklahoma, by the way, coming in at 18. So what you've got here is you've got essentially what I would think of as sort of 3 tiers in the SEC right now, or at least 3 tiers that really matter. The top tier, which includes a Texas and a Georgia, these are teams that are likely to be in the playoff. Then you've got the group below that I would say are all possible and very realistic possibilities of being in the playoff. That's a Bama, that's an Ole Miss, that's probably a Missouri right now. And then below that, you've got and I don't think we're talking enough about these teams here right now, your dark horse playoff teams where, in the case of Tennessee, for instance, I don't think Tennessee makes the playoff. But if it is a preseason top 25 team, a quarterback in, Nico, who's getting some attention, they probably have a couple of more pieces defensively than you perhaps realize. That's a team that would have a chance to win that, 9th or 10th game that does get them in that discussion. Y'all have heard me say this before about Oklahoma. I think that Oklahoma is the least discussed team in the SEC right now relative to the conversation we probably ought to be having. They're going to play some big football games here right now, but it's mostly Texas who's currently getting that attention. And then LSU is another example of this. We know what LSU didn't do this offseason. It didn't, go out and provide the defensive line depth that it needs for its program. But what we don't say enough is, Garrett Nussmeier is a quarterback we liked a year ago. Well, if we liked him then, he's a year older now, and he finally gets his chance to be the LSU quarterback. And, we talk a lot about coaching rankings on the basis of potential and who's, likely to win moving forward to the future. But if we did a different kind of ranking of coaches and we ranked them based on accomplishments and who's got the best overall coaching resume, just after a Kirby Smart and probably then a Dabo Swinney, one of the next coaches you'd have to put on the list because of a couple of trips to the college football playoff, because of a whole lot of regular season wins. It's a guy like Brian Kelly. And there's a lot about Kelly we don't necessarily love. He has a very abrasive personality. He's done some weird things since he's been LSU's coach, the family, fake accent stuff, an example of that. But Kelly also doesn't feel like the kind of coach who's going to go down in all of this without a fight. And so sort of treating them in that category of dark horse playoff teams to watch out for seems like it probably makes some sense. So that to me was my sort of key takeaway there when it comes to the ESPN update of its preseason top 25. Is ESPN not buying into the Ohio State hype yet, at least at the expense of Georgia? And let's look at those next couple of groups of SEC teams, with Texas probably a little closer to Georgia than the rest, but Missouri, Ole Miss, Bama, of that group, at least one is likely to make the playoff here this year. And of that discussion between, like I said, the Tennessee, the Oklahoma, the LSU, I'd probably put Texas A&M in that category too. Those dark horse teams are also playing to spoil one of these other playoff opportunities and perhaps create one of their own. That should be worth watching. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Also, before we go here today, let's get ready to give you a shout out to our friends at shout out to our friends at the Finish Long Drink. We'll get to R.S. Andrews here in a moment for R.S. Andrews Cool Down. But for now, a little bit of a shout out to the Finish Long Drink here. A lot of you love this time of year, whether it be the peach-flavored version for a limited time here in the Peach State. I love that because it kind of has that sort of amber-colored peach can, which is really cool. I just love the way in which the condensation sort of drips down the can this time of year. Just those great coolers that keep the drink so ice cold. And for me, it's the blue can. It's the traditional flavor, the grapefruit with the gin kick. A lot of you like the cranberry, long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume, long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar. You're trying to get your bathing suit bodies ready to go. Maybe the long drink zero is a good choice for you on all of that. Either way, there is a long drink variety for you when it comes to this ready-to-drink cocktail category. There is no better tasting version in the category than our friends at the Finish Long Drink. So please find them online. TheLongDrink.com for more on that. TheLongDrink.com. And you can pick out and pick up some Finish Long Drink here today. All right, so on Friday's version of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down, we talked a good bit about the Scotty Scheffler situation and the fact that Scheffler probably not very well equipped to go to jail. And I was telling the story about when I was young, and I don't make a lot of speeding. Speeding's serious. You shouldn't do it. But I did when I was very young. I was going too fast. And come to find out, if you go way too fast, they don't just give you a ticket, they take you to jail. So we were kind of joking about that there on Friday. Thankfully, I didn't get put in a cell, but I didn't get put in a cell, but I did get booked. I got the fingerprint, got the photo, had to turn to the right, had to do all that kind of stuff. And so, as you would imagine, some of our people had some fun with that. And I wasn't doing anything all that rebellious. I was just driving too fast. But nonetheless, our people had some fun with that, including, we'll show you this, UGA Nation 412, kind of making fun of what he think a booking photo of me might look like with some face tattoos. Little comparison to Scotty Scheffler there. UGA Nation says, I was hoping to see Mr. DawgNation Daily after a speeding infraction some 28 years ago. He says, I didn't know he had all those face tats when he was younger. Yeah, that's probably what it would take to make me look tough. And even that, I don't know that I'd be all that cut out for jail necessarily. But I was at least briefly in there, booked, if nothing else, a little bit like Scotty Scheffler was there on Friday. So we had some fun with that. Lousy, stinking Gators. Give them credit. They did win the baseball series here this weekend. But football, a long time before they'll be able to have anything to brag about with Georgia. And by the way, Georgia's still having a much better baseball season, even despite the desperate efforts of Florida here this weekend. 1,290 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. We'll see all of you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that today. All right, we'll find out what's on your mind here. We'll take some comments. I'll tell the rest of the audience of this later on, too. We've also got kind of an interesting schedule here coming up. So next week, kind of post-Memorial Day, I am taking a little bit of vacation time. Just no, I'm not going on a cruise, but we are going to sort of step away from work there for a little while. So we will have some shows for you next week. And then we've also got this is a little bit of a different kind of. Did I just lose something here? I think I just lost my battery on my headset, so I'm just going to take this off. I'm assuming I'm still hearing. I think my battery's just died. But it's a little bit of a different kind of summer for me here this year. And so we'll be telling you more about that. I've got some things coming up this summer that I don't typically have. So we'll do some of that here and explain some of that in the time to come. But kind of a fun series of shows coming up next week. All right. I'm going to get some comments here at DawgNation.com. We'll find out what's on everybody else's mind here today there as well. Speaking of Missouri, one of those playoff contenders, Scott Harris says, I just checked Missouri's schedule for next year. They should coast. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that kind of puts Missouri in that conversation. They play essentially nobody in September. So the first game of note for Missouri doesn't happen until after, you kind of get into October. Obviously, they avoid Georgia. So that's one of the things that, I mean, Missouri notices this too. They know they're playing an easy schedule, and they're going to try to load up on it. Would say that Ole Miss is a little bit of an example of that there as well. Ole Miss avoids Bama. That's been a typical, problem for them. Missouri avoids Georgia, and that's part of the reason why, there was some early playoff buzz around both the Rebels and the Tigers, and also part of the reason why both those programs were fairly active in the transfer portal. Rambo says, I was pulled over by a Georgia State trooper, and to this day, I'm not sure why I didn't go to jail. I'm glad he used common sense in dealing with someone that didn't appear to be a danger to himself or others. Yeah, and look, here's the thing. Like obviously, I would like for Sacovie White not to have gotten caught up in what was sort of a ticky-tack situation. But if you, go the wrong way in downtown Gainesville, that's my hometown, at 3:30 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, you're probably not getting arrested. You do something like that at 3 o'clock in the morning, on a late Saturday night as the bars are closing. And that's not because Sacovie White is doing anything wrong. It's just because police treat that particular time and that particular situation, they just treat it differently. They just do. And if you were a law enforcement, or if you were, tasked with making sure that the scene didn't get too crazy, who's to say we wouldn't do the same thing too? Let's see what else. DT says we could see the University Athletic Association declare bankruptcy in order to satisfy the judgment and not actually pay the full amount or even half. That's how many corporations deal with excessive judgments. Well, there has been some talk, that some entities were, considering that. But, a lot of these athletic departments are also going to be looking to borrow money again in future years too. So they want to be a little bit careful about that. Let's see what else. Scott Harris says that booking and arresting any person for driving the wrong way on a one-way street is a waste of taxpayer money. This is why we don't talk about this kind of stuff, typically speaking, because I think that different people sort of see it differently. And I'm totally fine with people having a different point of view than me on this. Yeah, I'm totally fine with that. Let's see what else. DMart42 and Frank Patterson talking about the future of Glenn Schumann. Yeah, I mean, obviously, we think Schumann's next stop is probably as a head coach somewhere, if we had to guess. We think that's probably true. Exactly where that is, we would assume it's going to be a fairly big job because, obviously, Schumann's been kind of biding his time and seemingly waiting for that big job to come around. Woodland Revival says, I've had more speeding tickets than I can count. I wish that wasn't the case. I think I need, scolding by Kirby. Yeah, I'm a little bit the same way. And like I said, I do not condone speeding. And I mean, it's just dangerous. Like, people do dangerous things on the road all the time. It's like, it's one of the things that kind of comes up for me because we've been talking about traffic-related stuff lately, or at least over the course of the last, couple of years, whatever. Like, I'm just amazed that just driving like Georgia 400 to work every day, I'm amazed at the crazy stuff I see on Georgia 400. I do. Now, I'm probably a fairly aggressive driver. I think you have to be during, sort of crowded city situations, sort of trafficky situations. I think you got to be a little bit aggressive. Otherwise, you're perhaps a different kind of dangerous. But there are plenty of people who, like, the stuff they do I'm shocked by it. Now, I'm also reminded, was it George Carlin, the old comedian who had the bit about anybody who drives faster than you is a maniac and anybody who drives slower than you is a moron? Like, perhaps there's some of that with me there too. But, I just see people darting in and out of lanes. It's just crazy. It's just crazy. And, like I said, I don't ever talk about anything here that's not, what we normally talk about. But when it comes to stuff like this, I am not a civil libertarian. I'm just not. Some of you are, and you have every right to be, but I am not. I'm not. I think that generally speaking, even when I get caught up in some of this kind of stuff, because I've definitely gotten ticky-tack tickets and we call them sort of pretextual stops. When you get stopped for blinker, things like that late at night, they're looking for DUI. That's what they're doing. So you get kind of caught up in all this kind of, stuff. Sometimes I've gotten, kind of caught up in what I think of as sort of ticky-tack nonsense. But I sort of feel like, from my point of view, I kind of understand why law enforcement behaves that way. Not everybody loves it, but I do have a little bit of a different opinion on that. Spencer Clark says 400, that's the highway, is just an all-out jungle as a trucker. I hate seeing him in the fast lane. See, this is what they don't realize. And Spencer, as a trucker, you understand this, is that people will dart around these lanes and then they'll dart in front of a truck. And they don't realize the trucks can't stop the way the cars can. They just don't get it. And I see almost accidents all the time with these, people kind of darting in and out of lanes. See, the problem is, it's I don't think the Fast and the Furious movies were a net positive for society overall, because now anybody in a Honda Civic thinks he's, bad. He thinks he's a bad dude. And so they're just darting around all this traffic. And, you pull in front of a truck like that, you're liable to have that truck drive right through your back seat. Eric Patton says the pro golfer is lucky he's not still in jail. Yeah, I think when all the details come out about that, we're going to find out that, it certainly seems like we're going to end up hearing that Scheffler, at least based on some of the stuff that I've read, didn't, fail to acknowledge the police officer or disregard the police officer, that somebody else told him he could go, and the one police officer didn't realize that. That's where I think we're going to end up, figuring out what happened. But once again, we got protests all over the place right now. Of course, security's on edge about stuff like this. And there was a fatality there that morning too. It's I think it's possible to say, okay, well, in this particular case, a police officer made a huge error in terms of how he treated Scotty Scheffler. I think it's pretty possible to say that. At the same time, unless new information comes out, I'm not looking to put this guy on blast either. And that puts me very much in the minority compared to the way that most people are. But unless I find out new information, I'm just sort of willing to let this be a really bad choice and not necessarily the kind of thing I want to end that dude's life over. Lance D says 985 used to be got off in the 90s and early 2000s. He says too many NASCAR wannabes. So, Lance, I told you about my speeding ticket that I got going way too fast when I was 18. That was on 985. It was. See, the problem with 985 was back then there wasn't a ton of traffic on 985. And so if you did want to go fast, and you shouldn't want to do that, but if you did want to go fast, back then the road was flat enough, straight enough, and sort of sparsely traversed enough that you could crank it up if you wanted to. And that's what people did. Let's see what else. Taylor Russell says, I don't believe that Georgia players should get special treatment, but if you are a Georgia athlete, make a small infraction like taking a wrong turn, there's no way you should be arrested by the Athens police. Yeah, I guess so, but, I love Georgia football, but I don't know that I want the police giving special treatment to anybody. And in this particular case, he was in and out within an hour, paid $26. It just doesn't seem like that big of a deal to me. As I've told y'all before, I think what people kind of get a little bit, agitated by is it sort of feels like bad PR. But one of the things you perhaps heard me say in the past is I don't believe that public relations exist. It's a bad look. I have never had anyone accurately define what a supposed bad look is. I don't believe in PR. I don't believe in public relations. I don't believe in a bad look. There are bad actions, and there are acceptable actions. But something being it's not that bad, but it's a bad look. Unless you can accurately define what a bad look is, I'm not sure I buy that as a concept. So I think that's where a lot of this energy around this topic comes from is that, hours worth of his time, $26 worth of his money, kind of an irritation. But the thing that people get really agitated by is what either certain media types or opposing fans are going to say as a way of kind of sort of conjuring up the bad look for Georgia to have one of its players arrested like this. But you don't have to believe that. You can just shrug that off and say it's just a thing that happened. And I'm guessing that's what Sacovie White did. Sacovie White, I don't believe, is going to run stadium steps for this. I mean, now I don't know. Maybe he will, but this is not the kind of thing of like, we're going to teach him a lesson about turning the wrong way. I mean, I doubt that's the case. Bill Shirley says I was driving fast in the 70s. Well, that's back when cars went really fast too, right? I mean, now I guess some of those like Caprice Classics and things like that, maybe they didn't go very fast. But although maybe they did because the police cars were Caprice Classics back then. But I mean, you think about a good 70s, car. I'm sure they were going plenty fast. UGA Boy for Life Brunetti says at 3 a.m. you're just putting yourself out there like a target. Well, I'm not mad at him for being out after 3 a.m. I mean, he's a law-abiding citizen. He has a right to make whatever choice. Now, I don't know about curfew laws and things like that. I'm guessing based on some online chatter, we're going to end up finding this was some sort of like curfew-related thing, I'm guessing, but I'm not enough a legal expert. I'm not mad at Sacovie for even being out at 3 a.m. If he doesn't got anything to do in the morning, he wants to be out with his friends, I'm not mad about that. He has a free choice to do that. But if you are 18 and you're out at 3 a.m., you should understand this. The public views that as a nuisance. Now, Sacovie White's a great dude. We wish all 18-year-olds were like Sacovie. But the public in general thinks 18-year-olds still awake at 3 a.m. is a little bit of a nuisance. So they are going to be aggressively policed, fairly or not. That's just the way that's going to go. And once again, sometimes life is just that. Is that Sacovie, the best I can tell, didn't really do anything all that wrong other than making a driving error. Certainly not scandalous that he was out at 3 a.m., but if you are out at 3 a.m., all of your actions are going to generate extra scrutiny. They just are going to. And, that's fine. Eric Patton says assault and battery with a deadly weapon is pretty serious. Those charges against Scheffler are going to be dropped, I believe, today, though. And I think we're going to find out that probably the police report as described, not exactly I'm guessing there's still more information to come out about all of this, but I'm not looking to necessarily end the police officer's, life over this either necessarily. Frank Patterson says, would you agree that Texas fans are the Ohio State fans of the SEC? Loud, entitled, haven't won anything big in a long time. Yeah, I think probably so. I do think that's the case. I do think that's the case. And, this is one of the reasons why I'm not all that thrilled about SEC expansion, although it has clearly made it for an interesting season for us upcoming, is that, culturally, most of the SEC teams have kind of always been a fairly cohesive fit with each other. In other words, we may hate so-and-so fans. Florida fans have always been a little bit of a different breed, but we may hate so-and-so fans, but they are essentially from a sort of, I guess, outlook on life standpoint, pretty similar to us overall. Texas feels like a different animal altogether. This does not, conference rivalry has always been really fun for me because it's two pretty similar groups of people acting like they're very, very different, which is kind of fun in its own right. Now the SEC expanded so much that the original theme of the SEC, the original vibe of the SEC feels pretty different to me now. And so I do believe the energy around Georgia Tech is going to be just how different the two fan bases are. I believe that's probably true. Let's see what else. Go to Facebook here for a moment. We'll see what folks are doing over there. We'll get ready to wrap it up here in a few minutes. On Facebook. Zach Adams wants some fried chicken. I always love that. Let's see what else. They got some food orders going on over here. Matt Rukavina says he got pinched by Athens Police Department when I was a freshman, but it was for fighting outside of Classic City Saloon. I did some community service for that. Yeah. So, like what Matt's describing right there, this is ultimately why, and listen, like I don't go out very much anymore because I'm in my 40s. But even when I was like in my 30s, like when I was like an adult, even then, they don't want you just standing around. It's like, if you leave a bar and you're just sort of standing in the parking lot for a second, like the bouncers will come over and they will run you off. Like nobody wants people just around. That's one of these sort of like entertainment situations. And when I was back then, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just, taking some time to get to whoever was driving me home or whatever, just kind of slowly walking. But, anything that's not like, if you're not actively spending money, you're kind of viewed as a nuisance, fairly or not. And I've gotten wrapped up in that from time to time. And what Matt's telling is why is because when you get a bunch of young dudes together, if they stand around long enough late at night like that, eventually a couple of them are going to start fighting. And so that's why everybody just sort of gets treated the same, is because eventually some of them are going to start fighting. Let's see what else. Jerry Popham thinks it was a waste of time to arrest Sacovie White. A lot of people are going to kind of agree with that too. And certainly I would understand that if I was Sacovie, I'd be pretty irritated they got wrapped up in all of that. Rodney White going to have a little Waffle House for lunch. That sounds good. Let's see what else. Greg Baker says, I think about just about every time a player has been arrested, it's turned out there was more to the story than initially reported, and then the arrest was justified. Yeah, I don't know that we're going to hear anything, like that in this particular situation. What we're going to probably hear is, and we were actually talking about this the other day about remember when I mentioned this? Like I said, this is way out of bounds, but there's this book that's gotten some attention that the average person is guilty of 3 felonies a day or whatever. All of us are guilty of something kind of all the time. And if they want to get you, they can get you. Most of the time, they just don't want to get you. At 3 o'clock on a Saturday when they're trying to get everybody home out of the bars, at that particular time, they sort of want to get you. They do. They are enforcing the law different at 3 a.m. on a Saturday morning than they do, in the middle of the afternoon. That doesn't make what Sacovie White did bad, but it does mean that you're going to be subject to extra scrutiny. It's just the way it goes. Let's see what else. Matt Rukavina, more details on his fight, saying, I can't remember what started it, but he said something to my then girlfriend and got in my face, so I swung at him. So there you go. Matt Rukavina doing his best Ricky Stenhouse impersonation. By the way, good to see Kathy Aquaviva in the comment section today. Kathy also sporting a new profile pic, too, looks like. Saying, can we just fast forward to August? Yeah, Kathy, I know what you mean. All right, let's go around the comment section one more time. We'll get ready to wrap it up for today. Back on DawgNation.com here for a minute. Baruch says the funniest thing about the Texas fans is the crying about the horns down. Yeah, I don't get why that's such a big deal. I totally agree. West GA Dog fan wondering if I was in my Monday Nitro attire when I got booked. Yeah, I wonder what I was wearing. There's no telling. No telling what I was wearing for that. Let's see what else. Dave Snow says the question that needs addressing: if a non-student athlete got a citation, would it be reported? Well, of course it wouldn't. We know that's the case. But that also, I think, distorts the situation where I think we have a tendency to think, well, the football players in particular are sometimes being targeted. That's sometimes the belief that's out there. But if you actually find out, Athens police on a Saturday, they're arresting a lot of people. I mean, they're casting a very wide net. And I'll tell you another story on this is one of these years, this is a good number of years ago. Now, this is probably almost 20 years ago. A little bit, it's more than 15, probably less than 20 years ago. We had one of these like game day buses, kind of like one of these nice like sort of motorhome type things. A bunch of friends, we're going to go to a game, had this, and then after the game, the big motorhome thing pulled downtown. And I didn't get in trouble for this, trying to make good decisions. But a bunch of the guys, were getting off the motorhome thing, and they all had like open containers. And, a lot of downtowns have, a little bit lax open container laws now, but that's typically for stuff bought on premises. And downtown Athens is not one of those places. And so, I mean, like all these guys are just like getting off this motorhome, and like one right after the other. Athens PD is just handing out these tickets like one right after the other because, some of what they're doing on one of these Saturday nights is they're just citing people for everything they can. They are approaching it very, very aggressively. And so, like I said before, I didn't get in trouble for this, but a bunch of the guys I was with, they all got cited for like open container and things like that, which, you got to follow the law. Once again, I'm not condoning that. I'm just saying this is a thing that happened. And ultimately, that's kind of a nuisance. You're kind of aggravated by it. And they said, well, you didn't get arrested. You just got cited. But, sometimes that's just what happens, right? It's like, they are not putting up with anything. And they're going to err on the side of the iron fist because if you don't, you got Matt Rugavina fighting in the streets. Let's see what else. DT also says that losing 2 of 3 of the lousy stinking Gators was not helpful for getting a super regional host. I'm guessing probably not. He says, why is that important? Because the NCAA just sent the softball team to UCLA. Yeah, you could be going about anywhere, I guess. I reckon so. That's probably the case. All right, back on YouTube here for a moment. Frank Patterson wants to know if Matt Rukavina won the fight. Matt, did you win the fight? Now, we don't condone fighting, but did you win? By the way, did y'all see Ricky Stenhouse punch Kyle Busch last night? Funny. Stick D says, I've gotten confused or at least had to take a second look with some of the one-way roads in Athens. Oh, yeah. I've driven – in fact, I'm actually remembering this now. I drove the wrong way in Athens, I think, the last time I was there, I think. It is absolutely true. And I have definitely driven the wrong way because I go do high school football games, things like that, all these little old downtowns. You drive through all these little things, and they all have crazy traffic patterns. They're all crazy. I've driven the wrong way so many times. Absolutely. 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 Let's see what else. Wally Smith says, I'm sure many of 16, 17, and 18 didn't make the right decision. Yeah, in this particular case, I don't even know that I would say that Sacovie White kind of made the wrong decision. He just messed up. He just erred. E-R-R-E-D. He just made an error. You know what I'm saying? Just a mistake. Not like, he made a mistake, now he's paying for it. No, he just made an error. He made a mistake. I don't think it's anything more than that. But it's like, how many times do I probably cross over the yellow line driving during the day? But if you do that at 2 o'clock in the morning, you are going to get pulled over. And I don't really think it makes any party involved bad because, it's like It's like you can be, like somewhat lax on situations for a while, but then eventually you become like, say, like Frat Beach for the Georgia-Florida game or something like that. Like once stuff gets out of control, it's a little bit harder to kind of put the toothpaste back in the tube, just being honest. And some of you who are like teachers and coaches, you understand that. You can always start out strict and kind of loosen up as you need to, but you can't start out loose and then like turn the knob in the other direction. Like I said, you end up being like, Frat Beach for the Georgia-Florida game or something like that. And that's why stuff like this goes down. Georgia on Tap has an interesting theory. He says, Texas and Ohio State are much bigger schools. They have a lot more jerks because of the overall size of the alumni base. It's just how numbers work. Florida's the only school that, that's interesting. So what Georgia on Tap is saying is that when you look at like Ohio State, which is like 50,000 undergrad students, Texas, obviously a very large school, Florida's in that sort of 40+ thousand range. That the reason why it seems like there are so many bad Florida fans is just sort of the law of large numbers. It's an interesting theory. I can believe that. That's an interesting theory. Interesting theory for sure. All right, one more time here. Bill Sanders says Frat Beach on St. Simons was wild years ago. Yeah, and like the people have been fighting against it ever since. But it's sort of hard to go back. It's like some of these beach towns with spring break are the same way. It's like once you kind of like, hey, we're cool. We're not like regular police. We're like cool police. Like once you once you sort of give off like, hey, we're cool police. Like, and then things get crazy. It's sort of hard to like get it under control after that. And it's like, if anything ever goes down for you in your home, it's like you call 911. You don't want the cool police to come. You want like the head knocking police to come. And I don't know. I'm probably saying too much. Barry Watkins says, how is that fair if you do the same thing at a different time? Life is not fair. In fact, life is not even promised to be fair. Like there is no fairness. It's not about fair. That's just a fact. Let's do something else. DT says he says you hit Kyle on the track, you're gonna get spun out. This is known as the law of Dale Senior. I didn't see the All-Star race. Typically speaking, the All-Star race, I almost thought about like the Apollo Creed line of it's the Duke from Rocky IV, but this is supposed to be an exhibition. Like that's a lot of fighting for an All-Star race, I thought. But anyway, pretty funny. Matt Rugavina says that he swung, didn't really connect very well, but then he backed off. The next thing I knew, APD bike cops had me face first against the wall. Guys were fast. Yeah, I'm just telling you right now that like that's the one thing they're looking for is knuckleheads trying to fight. Also, now as you can probably guess, I'm not much of a fighter, but I do believe that actual fighting is a lot more difficult than the movies make it look, especially if you've had anything to drink. You get winded like that, and it's just, being competent with the fist is just not an easy thing to do. Matt Rugavina says he provides all that to give everybody closure, which is pretty good. All right, so good stuff. Fun things out there. Appreciate all of that. All right, and also a lot to do for us here this week. So let me say a big shout out to our friends at RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. What you don't want is you don't want your air conditioning unit to get arrested in its natural flow of keeping cold air, in your house. So that way, go ahead and get it tuned up to factory fresh specs. So they'll take good care of you. And make sure you stay cool and comfortable all summer long. So find them online, rsandrews.com, for more on that. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.